Welcome into the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky, Jim Leitner joining you for the first Fighting Saints Report of 2020 as the Fighting Saints christen the new year with a tough series against the Waterloo Blackhawks. It's the first actual home that they've had against the Blackhawks. They had a home game and an away game before this, but both in separate weekends. So this weekend we saw a true home and much like the first two games, almost identical in a lot of ways. On Friday night in Dubuque, it was a tight 3-2 loss for the Fighting Saints, and on Saturday in Waterloo, it was a blowout once again. And I know on the broadcast on Friday we talked about no way we see another 7-1 between these two teams. Well, we didn't see 7-1 on Saturday. We saw 8-2. Dubuque scored one more, Waterloo got one more, but I really didn't expect to see a blowout in these two games. We got one again in Waterloo, and we'll touch on that more and maybe why the Fighting Saints have had some success there. But just starting by and large with this weekend, coming into it, my thought was 2 against Waterloo, 2 against Chicago, 2 against Waterloo. 3-3 is a great record when you're playing the two top teams in the league. So far, they're on pace for that. What were your overall thoughts on the weekend?
Well, I think we could probably save ourselves a lot of time if we go back to November, copy and paste what we did on the show, those two shows about the last two games, and get out of here a little quicker. But
I'm trying to get out of other responsibilities, so we gotta just make it seem fresh.
But I think I look at this series with Waterloo, and I think you could make a real good argument that the Saints have been the better team all 4 games. I think they could very easily be 4-0 in this series, and again, it's really kind of eerie how the two games here have been almost exactly the same, and the two games there have been almost exactly the same. And but I think getting a split with Waterloo is a good result. When you look at that's a team that's really running away with the Western Conference right now, and Dubuque's a team that's in the hunt for a top 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. So getting a split, I think, is a good deal, and but it's a great rivalry, and it's nice. What I really like is seeing the Saints have a lot of success in Young Arena, because they've never had success there. Very rarely in the last 10 years have they had success in Young Arena. So to hang 2 of the worst losses in the Tier 1 era on Waterloo in the same season is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, last season was a house of horrors for the Fighting Saints. They didn't win one game in Young Arena. They lost 2-1, they lost 5-1, and they lost 6-0 in Young Arena last year. So it wasn't even as if they didn't have a win there. They really didn't have a chance in some of those games. And last year for Dubuque, it seemed like early on in those games they were taken out of it. I mean, Waterloo, that place gets loud when the crowd's into it, and this year they've been able to flip that script, and they've taken the crowd out of it in the first period and then just rode that momentum the rest of the way. But here we've seen 2 fantastic hockey games. I mean, playoff-like hockey both times. 3-2, low scoring, a lot of shots, good goaltending, good defense, a couple big plays. It was Wyatt Shingothi in the first game with a penalty shot with less than 2 minutes remaining. It was Shingothi on the power play with less than 10 minutes remaining this time for Waterloo. But this game, even more so than the first one, it felt like the Blackhawks just got a couple bounces that really went their way. Their first 2 goals went in off Fighting Saints defenders in front, deflected past Aiden McCarthy. And without those 2 bounces, we're talking about a phenomenal sweep in goal for McCarthy this weekend. And even though he didn't get the victory on Friday, I thought it was a great look at how he can bounce back after a tough weekend.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think even the first game against Dubuque, or against Waterloo here in Dubuque, I think there was a bad bounce or a dump in that deflected off a defenseman that led to a breakaway. So, I mean, very similar there too. But to your point about Aiden McCarthy, it does say a lot about him to be able to rebound the way he did. Last weekend, his first 2 games back from the break, he gave up a total of 12 goals in a pair of losses to Cedar Rapids and Team USA U17s. But it speaks a lot to his maturity that he was able to put that behind him, have a really good week in practice, and come out and really play well enough to win both games. He put his team in a position to win both games. And even Friday night, you mentioned the first 2 goals were bad bounces that you can't really fault him on. but to have him come back and bounce back like that is huge. He mentioned that what really helped him a lot was his teammates had a lot of confidence in him. Even though he had a rough weekend, he came to practice. They were very supportive of him, and I think it's a theme that I think we've seen a lot of this season.
Yeah.
Where if a guy is a little bit down, his teammates pick him up, or if he's struggling to score and then he scores, it seems like they're more excited for him. So I think that's something that really speaks to the chemistry of this team and how there's a great bond in that dressing room. And I think that's a big reason why the Fighting Saints are where they are in the standings, is they have that great cohesiveness and that great chemistry.
Another big reason is the defense, and the defense was back to being what we expected this weekend as well.
Oh, no question about it. I think, I think their angles might have been just off a little bit that first weekend back. But what I noticed is there was a much more concerted effort to make plays in the defensive zone. That the first weekend back, that might have been a little bit of rust, Christmas rust, and where you're not quite back into game mode. They had maybe a practice and a half to prepare for a 3-3. So, I think you can give them a pass on that. But again, you're playing a really good quality team in Waterloo that has a lot of offensive firepower. One of the top scoring teams, one of the top offensive threats in the league. And so to shut them down, give up 3 goals on Friday and 2 goals on Saturday, I think that was huge. And on the defensive side too, the penalty kill was outstanding. Friday or Saturday night especially. When it was still a 4-2 game, 5-on-3 power play, Waterloo strikes twice there. It's a tie game, and it's maybe changes the whole complexion of the game. But the defense on that penalty kill was outstanding.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about Saturday. Is we'll get into that. That game was a lot closer than the score indicated up until it wasn't. And it's a kind of a weird thing to say, but that was a very close game until it wasn't. And especially in the end, I think the difference between going into that third period 5-2 versus 4-3 might have decided that game as well, because there were a couple instances that penalty killed a 5-on-3, a minute 40 of 5-on-3, and you kill that off. It's tremendous to keep that a 4-2 lead. But then 2 minutes left in the period, and Ryder Ralston comes down and he rips one off the crossbar, and then a minute later Matthew Copperwood, 28 seconds left in the period, buries a backhand. 4-3 versus 5-2 heading into the third period makes a world of difference, and I think you could tell that in the beginning of the third period. Waterloo just didn't come out with the bite and the push I was expecting them to. I think if it was 4-3, you definitely would have seen a bigger push from Waterloo.
Well, and you could even make the argument that it should have been tied, because a 5-on-3 is, you almost have to score. When you're down 4-2, you almost have to score there. And the Waterloo didn't. And I mentioned the Rolston ringing one off the crossbar. For my money, I thought Waterloo dominated that period.
Yeah.
They were by far the better team, and they deserved a better fate. But, they dominate for 19 minutes, and then they have a poor line change that leads to a 2-on-0. Copperwood and Stewart on a 2-on-0. And again, situation like that, you almost have to score.
Yep.
And that was... other than Dubuque really dominating that first period, I think that was the difference maker there, is going up, taking that 3-goal cushion into the third period. And Copperwood, what a beautiful move, really, to score on the backhand there and on the 2-on-0. And then from there, obviously, the Saints just kind of blew it open in the third period. It did seem like that took a lot out of Waterloo. They just didn't seem to have as much energy as they did in the second period when you got to the third.
Yeah, strong third period. Dubuque didn't pack it in, but they played much more sound defensively. That was a defense first period. And because of that defense first, they got some chances offensively, and that's when the floodgates really opened, able to get those late goals, a couple coming in the last 5 minutes of the period, including Ryan Beck and Reese Gaber to really ice the game, just cherries on top at that point. But
I think against a team like Waterloo, you almost have to do that.
Yeah.
They're so explosive. We saw what happened Friday night. You let them hang around, within striking distance, and they're going to take advantage of it. They always do. They always have. So in a game like that, if you get opportunities to really add on, I think you have to. And that's that's not. I don't think that's really rubbing it into
No.
Waterloo. I think it's more a situation where you have to score when you can against a team like that.
And based on personnel choices, I mean, Reggie Millette, Tommy Middleton, and Robert Cronin started their final power play of the game. So
Exactly.
Dubuque wasn't trying to run up the score, but then when those guys are tired, then Gaber comes back on the ice with a couple more. And I was thinking of that as I was broadcasting the game. I'm thinking, okay, you start with the fourth line, then immediately you have a top scorer out there on the ice. But that's not so much that Oliver David said, suddenly, I want a goal. It's just, I was thinking, anyone else you put out on the ice is a usual power play suspect. I mean, you're going to throw Gaber, Cherameta, Venuto, Glenn. They're always on the power play.
Exactly.
So you have that just spoke to the depth of the Fighting Saints there, where suddenly once the fourth liners were off the ice, suddenly anyone else was a prime power play suspect. But yeah, 8-2. The first time they beat Waterloo this season in Young Arena, it was 7-1. It was the worst Tier 1 loss in the history for Waterloo. Dubuque has now done that twice this season in the span of 2 games, 2 6-goal defeats for Waterloo, and that was something that hadn't happened previously in 17 years. It's pretty incredible to see that back-to-back.
It really is. And you look at it and you think about that, and I think Dubuque has had some losses like that at home, so it's not rare. But, you think about the complexion. Waterloo's always had a good team. But, you get into those situations where you fall behind early, you're chasing the game, you take chances, and it leads to goals the other way. So, I mean, that kind of explained how you are going to have some lopsided losses, even at home, because, you fall behind early. You take chances, and, you leave yourself exposed on the back end. Or they've had years where they haven't had good goaltending. So for the Fighting Saints to hang 2 6-goal losses on them, the first 6-goal losses in the Tier 1 history is pretty remarkable and really speaks to the bounce back of this team. And, I think that's, I think the really big statement, the first 4 games back from the break weren't the greatest.
Yeah.
But to make that kind of statement against Waterloo, especially with especially with Chicago coming up this weekend, I think that was a huge confidence booster. And the point that we haven't touched on is they had 13 different guys have at least a point on Saturday night. So you got a lot of guys feeling good about themselves coming back on the bus, and you got your top goaltender coming back into the fold this week. So the Saints should feel pretty good going into Chicago.
Interesting that at least for me, again, I'm thinking about this on the ride home, 2 6-goal defeats for Waterloo at home, and we've kind of touched on this already. I thought the first one, that 7-1 win, to me is still the most complete performance this season for the Fighting Saints. That one felt a lot more dominant than this one did, even though they have the same scores. You never had a period in that first game where you felt Waterloo was going to creep back into it. And even though Dubuque was up 4-0 after this first period in this game, I actually thought the first period, the first time they beat Waterloo, was even better. They outshot them 20-6, and they were only up 2-0. That was one of those games where you almost worried if they didn't get that second goal in the first period. So not taking anything away on a tremendous performance, but that first game, that first 7-1 victory still felt like it was just asserting their will more and more as the game went on. And this one felt like dominant first period, you're up 4-0, held on a little bit in the second because you knew that push was coming, and then once you weathered that storm, dominate again in the third.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And you would have preferred to have tickets at one end of the ice because that's where almost all the goals were scored. But again, I thought that second period, really, Waterloo could have gotten right back into it and gotten a 4-3 or 4-4. And then it's an entirely different ball game. But again, I think you're right. The first game over there, I thought was a much more complete effort, and I don't think Waterloo had as much of a chance to really win that game. If I'm not mistaken, they scored the only goal in the third period of that game. I think so. So I mean, again, you're talking about going 50 some minutes where you're shutting them out and scoring 7 goals. So much more complete effort on the first one, but. we're not going to complain about a 6-goal victory in Waterloo.
8-2 is 8-2, and again, they took them out of that game after the first period. It wasn't over because you saw that push from Waterloo, but even when you make a tremendous push, you see how hard it is to come back from a 4-0 deficit right off the bat. And that Fighting Saints, something that we haven't touched on, and we can do it real quickly before we head to break, but they chased the league leader in goals against and save percentage 9 minutes into the game. I mean, Stein was out of there in a blink of an eye. That was the first time they've faced Logan Stein all season long, and they only saw him for 9 minutes, and then their normal enemy came back in, Gabriel Carrier, and he had a tough go of it too. That was just a game where everything was going in. And interesting how, I don't know the exact splits, but Carrier's numbers here at Mesquite Community Ice Center I know are fantastic, and against the Saints in Waterloo, they're not so good at all.
Yeah. I was kind of... anytime you have a goaltender change, you kind of wonder, was it the goalie or was it the coach sending a message to the team to play better? And PKO Hanley, the coach in Waterloo, is an old goaltender and really a goaltender specialist. So I would kind of tend to think that he was doing it to shake up the team more than to send a message to the goaltender. I don't think Stein was really off too much. I do think that the team in front of him wasn't playing nearly as well as they should have, and I do think that was more of a message to the team, and they did respond in the second period. But it's a 3-0 game, and then Carrier gives up a shootout or a penalty shot goal, which, you can't really blame him for that either. So I do think that was a positive move to shake up the team because the team did play a lot better after that.
Yeah, so Dubuque.
But again, knocking Stein out of the game is never a bad thing.
Nice little feather in the Fighting
I don't know
Saints
if he's been knocked out at all this year.
I don't think so.
I'd be surprised.
He leads the league in shutouts, so there are games there he hasn't given up that amount of goals in the entire game, let alone the first 9 minutes. Certainly another feather in the Fighting Saints cap this season, and again, they're the fourth team now to 20 wins as they join Chicago, Waterloo, and Team USA at that 20-win mark for the Fighting Saints, just 28 games into the season. We'll take our first break. When we come back, looking at the Winter Classic, which happened on New Year's Day, and also some World Junior action as that goaltender that Jim mentioned for the Fighting Saints, he's coming back with a little bit of hardware to Dubuque. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky and Jim Leitner, and looking at the international stage of hockey with the World Juniors just completed yesterday. Canada wins the gold medal over Russia in a fantastic World Juniors game. If you didn't get to watch the game, I certainly recommend going on YouTube, watching the highlights, because it was one of those instant classic games and a great comeback by Canada, who were down by 2 going into the third period and mounted a tremendous comeback, scoring the game winner with just a couple minutes left in regulation. But a very good World Junior tournament, and a pretty fun World Junior tournament for a couple Fighting Saints. Now, Eric Portillo didn't get to play, unfortunately, in the World Juniors, but still gets to represent his country, a great honor, and he's bringing home a bronze medal as Sweden and Finland, always a good rivalry and a good game in the bronze medal game. Sweden wins 3-2. But even though Portillo doesn't get to play, just tremendous to even be selected, first of all, to the World Juniors, and then to be able to get a medal with your country. There's not many people in the sport of hockey that can experience that feeling. No
doubt about it. And he was the number 3 goaltender in a 3 goaltender situation for Team Sweden, and all 3 goaltenders were, I believe, 3rd round NHL draft picks. So you're going in with some pretty good competition there. Would have liked to seen him get some action, but it is what it is. Hopefully that's something that motivates him to. Now maybe he comes back with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder and says, hey, they didn't think I was good enough to play over there, so I'm going to prove that I'm the best goaltender over here. And so that could really work to Dubuque's benefit. And, I know that's something the Fighting Saints are kind of counting on. It's a tough situation for him, but because I know he would have loved to play. He's such a competitive kid and, such an outstanding goaltender, and to not get to play has got to be disappointing. But I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder, and he's going to have a lot to prove when he comes back here. But again, anytime you can go on that stage and win a medal is outstanding, because you're talking about the top players under the age of 20 in the entire world at that tournament. And you got NHL draft picks all over the place in that tournament for every team. So to go there and get a medal is pretty outstanding.
Yeah, Sweden gets the bronze. Finland, a team that has a former Fighting Saints player on there, and Matthias Michelli, just falls short of a medal. Very good Finnish team. I thought I kind of expected them to finish a little bit higher than they did, but that just shows you the depth of the tournament. And you mentioned NHL draft picks all over the place, how good so many of these nations are. But Michelli had a phenomenal tournament, and it's a continuation of his progression. I mean, 72 points in his last USHL season. Now he's the rookie leader in the Liga, which is the league he plays in Finland. He's third or fourth on his team in scoring overall. And he was one of the top 4 Finns on the team in terms of scoring. And when they beat Team USA 1-0 in the quarterfinals, he led the team in ice time. Not just forwards, he led every single player in ice time. And for a player that didn't factor into any of the scoring, he played about as good of a game as you could have hoped for.
Yeah, it looks like he might be the Rookie of the Year in that pro league over there in Finland. And I watched a few highlights of him playing in the World Juniors, and I didn't recognize him, to be honest. He just looks so much stronger. Mm-hmm. He looks bigger, and his face looks the same, so that's how I know it's him.
Yeah.
But he does not look like the same player. He looks so much bigger and stronger and faster and harder to knock off the puck. And I think he gained a lot from his year and a half in Dubuque. And he's the first one to admit that. And, he went back with a better defensive mindset, so he's better defensively, but I think he's better offensively too. It might help that he's, when he was in Dubuque, I don't think he had a ton of offensive help around him. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure over there he's got a lot more weapons that he can work with. But give him a lot of credit. He must have put a lot of time in the weight room, and as he does not look like the same player. Looks like such a more complete player, such a more polished player. And I'm sure the Arizona Coyotes are pretty excited about that as well.
Well, last year the biggest thing I heard from NHL scouts in terms of when they were scouting Michelli was his skating wasn't up to NHL standards. That's been fixed. Yeah. I think. I mean, based on, obviously you can't gauge it on TV as well as you can in person, but he's gained a step and a half at least. And the other thing I noticed in this tournament that he didn't do as much in Dubuque. In Dubuque, a lot of the times he was looking to skate around people. He's not trying to skate through people now in terms of just barreling them over, but what he's doing is when he gets into the zone, he's not going wide. He's attacking right down the middle, and he's drawing multiple defenders to him, and that's setting up his teammates around him. That's an NHL play when you just go right at the teeth of the defense, make them commit to you, and then you open up everything else in the offensive zone. That's such a heady play. It's something we didn't see as much, and again, maybe that's because he knows he's playing with higher level talent now, and again, not trying to knock anyone he was playing with last year, but that's just the fact when you're playing in the World Juniors at the very best of the best. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's something where he just has more confidence and strength, but that's a play that I didn't see from Matthias a lot last year that he made regularly in the World Juniors.
Yeah, and the other thing that maybe one of the only knocks I had on him last year is sometimes he seemed like he painted himself into a corner. Mm-hmm. He'd just skate to an area where the defender could easily take him out of the play. And you don't see that as much anymore. It seems like he's a much stronger skater, much more powerful skater, so much stronger on his edges that, he doesn't feel like he has to go and paint himself into a corner.
Yeah.
And that opens up more opportunities elsewhere. You saw a lot of plays just kind of ended after he entered the zone last year. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that. I see a guy who's so much more complete. And, I don't know if that was a benefit of going to Arizona's rookie orientation camp, or if he's just worked on his skating that much more that he's much more physically capable of doing more, or he's just more confident, or what it is. But he's a much better player than he was here in Dubuque, and last year he was the best player here and one of the best players in the league.
Yeah, it'll be fun to follow his progress, and again, in all indications, if he continues the strides that he's made over the last couple years, this is a player that the Coyotes want in their system, AHL and maybe even NHL within the next couple years. So
and you look at that team; they're pretty young right now, and they're good right now. And there might even be a playoff team this year. It'd be exciting for him to join that team when they're really starting to hit their stride.
Yeah, trending in the right direction everywhere for the Coyotes, which is good to see. In other World Junior news, I know we just touched on it, but Canada wins. It's Canada, another stacked team. I mean, talent upon talent upon talent, and that was a game that through two periods, it didn't feel like Canada had a chance. I mean, they had a goal, but that was a game where Russia was really controlling play, and then 15 minutes between the end of the second period and the beginning of the third period, something happened in that Canadian locker room because it was waves and waves and waves of Canadian players all third period, and they deserved to win that game because of the final 20 that they played.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because in the preliminary round, Russia just pounded them. Mm-hmm. It's like 6-0,
yeah.
Embarrassing. And if the Canadian, especially at the World Junior level, the Canadians take so much pride in that level and that tournament, and it's no matter where that World Juniors is, Canada has the best crowd.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable that so many people from all over the country go and support them. And the tournament was in the Czech Republic. And I remember hearing some commentary that the Czech Republic obviously had the best crowds, but Canada was like number 2 in terms of the support of how many people were there. So a lot of pride in that program and a lot of pride at that U20 level. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they were able to pull that out and rebound not only from that embarrassing loss in the preliminary round, but to rebound in that third period when they were probably being outplayed.
Yeah. What was surprising, and I know it was to you, the USA's finish. I mean, you can't even make it to the semifinals. And look, I know there is a lot of talent. Finland's a great team. Sweden's a great team. Everyone that made it to the semifinals is a tremendous team. But to look at all the talent that the U.S. had and to think that team couldn't even make it to the semifinals, it is kind of surprising. And I do think that maybe outside of Canada, top to bottom, the U.S. was the most talented lineup in this tournament. They were favorites going into the tournament from a lot of people. I don't think you found many that said the USA was anything worse than the silver medal finisher in their mind. So to see them not even medal was pretty surprising, and I don't really know what the issue is there, but a team that I definitely had higher hopes for than to lose in the quarters.
Yeah, and you look at a lot of last year the U18 team in USA hockey was the best it's ever been. Mm-hmm. You had realistically every single member of that team had the potential of being drafted last year.
Yeah.
I mean, which is you never see that. They had 6 first rounders?
8.
It was 8 first rounders. Ton of talent. Obviously, Jack Hughes is in the NHL right now, so he wasn't at the World Juniors, but so much talent up and down the lineup. And this is the year that they would really make a splash at the World Juniors. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think to pick them as a favorite, at least as a medal favorite, I think that's where they should be. Mm-hmm. But to not even get a medal is ridiculous, and they should have at least got a medal because, again, you're talking about a lot of the same guys who have played together for years.
Right, and that's what I didn't see any cohesion, which is interesting because when you have so many players, it was weird. But, yeah, the USA doesn't medal. Finland just misses out, but a tremendous tournament for the Finns. Sweden the bronze, Russia the silver, and Canada the gold in the World Juniors. And another big hockey event that happened right to kick off the new year, the Winter Classic and the Cotton Bowl. And again, to me, you don't have to dive too much into the game because it is just a regular season game. It's 2 points. But what were your overall thoughts on the spectacle down in Texas, one of the few outdoor Southern games that we've seen?
I thought it was outstanding.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And, that's... Again, I say it every year. I watch that more than I watch college football, and there were some good college football bowl games on that
Minnesota
day.
With a huge win.
Minnesota and Michigan playing Alabama. I mean, that's a good matchup. Didn't end up being that good a game, but Minnesota beat Auburn. Mm-hmm. But again, it's so much fun to watch those outdoor games, and it's one of those games that you just wish you could go to. Yeah. I mean, you wish Dallas was only a few miles away, that you could hit it really easily. And but great outdoor spectacle. They had it at the Cotton Bowl, which is on the grounds of the Texas State Fair. So they had all the pomp and circumstances around it,
Yeah.
which probably, I don't know that for every other Winter Classic, they've never had that outdoor atmosphere
Right.
like they did for this one. So I think that was something that was really special. And credit to the NHL. This is not getting stale at all.
No.
The Winter Classic is not getting stale, and I think they're always trying to find ways to make it bigger and better.
Mm-hmm.
And having it at the Texas State Fair and all the rides and all the carnival and all that stuff going on the outside really added to it, and I thought it was really cool. And credit NBC, they had great coverage from that, from the pregame to the final puck drop. I thought their coverage was outstanding and really helped you get a feel for what it was like.
And they also made the announcement that the Minnesota Wild will host the next Winter Classic at Target Field in Minnesota, which is one of the best new ballparks in all of Major League Baseball. Before we take our next break, early guesses as to who Minnesota will play, because they didn't announce the opponent.
Well, I certainly hope it's not the Blackhawks, because they've been in them for forever. But boy, that's a really good question. Maybe Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they'll have a Colorado. Colorado's having an outdoor game this year. Mm-hmm. But other than that, as far as big rivals for the Wild, maybe Minnesota, maybe Chicago. That's a good question. It'll be a good game, though, for sure. I'm sure they're going to get a rival in there.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Winnipeg possibly making that trip. Getting a Canadian team in is something that they want to do with the Winter Classic. My other guess was Colorado, but it would be interesting to have two outdoor games in such quick succession for Colorado. But they have done that with the Blackhawks. They have done that with the Penguins. The Rangers played two outdoor games in the span of 3 days when they had the Stadium Series in Yankee Stadium. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's Colorado, because again, for the NHL, that's a team that they want to market, I think, as much as possible in the next couple of years with all that young talent. Nathan McKinnon is now in the same conversation as the elites in the league. So I would, if I had to bet on it, I think I'm still taking Colorado because of all that marketable talent and because they're in the same division. And I can remember, I think earlier in the 2000s, some fantastic playoff series with Colorado and Minnesota, a couple 7-game series. So it's not as big of a rivalry as some of these other games we've seen, but you can still definitely market it as one. Yeah,
and I agree with you on the marketing the stars. I mean, I think that's why Chicago's been in it so many times, because they've had the big name stars. Mm-hmm. And Colorado does have some elite young talent that probably need a little bit of a boost in terms of being marketed.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to do that than having them on New Year's Day, which, for my money, I think more people watch that than they watch Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really the best way to market your team.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who the Wild play. That will be announced later on in the year. And speaking of outdoor games, when we go around the USHL after the break, there was the first Frosty Cup down in the Cotton Bowl, where Chicago and Green Bay played an outdoor game to kick off the weekend for the USHL. That and more on the other side of the break. And we're back on the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky and Jim Leitner talking around the USHL this week. A very busy week that started on Thursday. Really, it started on Monday. There was only one day this week where there weren't games, and that was Wednesday. But the real meat of the schedule started on Friday, and the first game on Friday was played outdoors in the Cotton Bowl between Chicago and Green Bay. They had played the night previous at the Dallas Stars practice facility, with Chicago winning 7-1. Green Bay fared a little bit better in the Cotton Bowl. They lost 7-2. I mean, this is a Chicago team that is rolling right now. They haven't played a single game since break ended in which they've scored less than 7 goals. They've scored 7 3 times. They've scored at 9 once. So Chicago sweeps Green Bay this weekend. And then there were a lot of tight games outside of that. There were plenty of overtime contests this weekend. There were plenty of high-scoring games, but a good mix of low-scoring games as well. The Fighting Saints, they split this weekend. Tri-City continues to roll. They've won 5 straight. Omaha continues to roll. They've won 5 straight. Team USA's now stumbling a little bit. They lost both to Sioux Falls this weekend. So a lot of teams starting to go on little runs here. But we have to start with Chicago because they played the first 2 games of the week. And right now it looks like there's no stopping the Steel.
I don't think so. And to go down there, and I think Green Bay's got a nice team. They beat the U17 team on New Year's Eve. That was a really nice win for them. And, I thought after seeing that, I thought they would give Chicago a much better weekend, and they just didn't. I mean, it was, again, to score outscore them 14-3, in unfamiliar circumstances, really, or unfamiliar settings. You're playing at the Dallas Stars practice rink and then at the Cotton Bowl. Mm-hmm. A lot of times you're kind of in awe of the surroundings, and it takes a while before it to become a real hockey game. But they were very thorough in both of those games. And again, I don't think Green Bay's a bad hockey team. I think that's a team that's right in the thick of things in the Eastern Conference, and needs to make a run. But to thoroughly handle a team like that is very impressive, and I'm certain that it got the attention of the people here in Dubuque, seeing that there's a home-and-home with the Steel this weekend.
Yeah, and in the Western Conference, things have gotten incredibly interesting. Waterloo's still 11 points ahead of the next closest team in second place. And, even if Waterloo stumbles a little bit, I have a hard time seeing the Blackhawks getting caught. But the number 2 spot is completely wide open right now because Tri-City and Omaha have both won 5 straight. They both won at least 6 in their past 10. And Fargo's done pretty well as well in their past 10. They're 5-2, 1-2. But now a single point separates Omaha, who's in 4th, from Fargo, who's in 2nd. Fargo's now tied with Tri-City, although Tri-City's played 4 more games than the Fargo Force. But, boy, second place is looking interesting now because some other teams outside of Waterloo and Fargo have started to play good hockey in the Western Conference.
Yeah, and you even go down as far as 5th place Lincoln. Lincoln's only 4 points out. Granted, they've been stumbling a little bit here down the stretch, but yeah, that's going to be an interesting race for that number 2 seed in the Western Conference, and it's so important because the top 2 seeds get a bye in the first round, and you really want that bye if you can get it. But I think my money's still going to be on Fargo, even though they really haven't played good hockey the last 10. I think that's the better of those 3 teams, including Tri-City and Omaha. But again, Tri-City, I think the Fighting Saints were fortunate to catch them early in the season. I think I've been saying that since September or October, that once Anthony Noreen gets his real fingerprints on that team, it's going to be a real good defensive team. It's going to be a team that's going to challenge, and just so much of an overhaul of that roster that that's what really kind of led to the bad, or the not bad start, but subpar start. And I do think that Tri-City is a team that could really contend for that as well.
And this is the Omaha team I expected for the entire season. The little run that they've gone on, it's too early, I think, to really jump the gun and say, well, this is for sure a top 3 team in the Western Conference, but I pegged them as a top 3 team in the Western Conference to begin the season, and they're only a point out of that right now. But an Omaha team that the numbers had always suggested this year that they were a little bit better than their record. It's finally starting to come around, but there are only 2 teams in the league right now better than Omaha in terms of defense, and that's Dubuque and Waterloo, who have been doing it all season long. But they're 3rd in terms of goals allowed. The scoring is where Omaha has struggled a little bit this season, but defensively they're so solid, and they're finally starting to get the results that those numbers dictate in the last couple games.
Yeah, they're still a +9 in the goal differential, so that's always a good thing, especially when you look at Tri-City is still a minus. That might be a little misleading because I know they had a couple blowout losses in the first couple months, but yeah, I think Omaha, if they figure things out a little bit better offensively, I think they could definitely go on that run and challenge for that number 2 spot.
In the Eastern Conference, there aren't nearly as many questions as the Western Conference. There's 0 question as to who the number 1 team is in the Eastern Conference. There's 0 question as to who the number 1 team is in the USHL right now. That's clearly Chicago. They're 5 points up on Team USA with 3 games in hand. They're 6 points up on Dubuque with Dubuque having 1 game in hand. And based on Team USA, they won 11 straight. Now they've lost 3 straight. I just don't see them holding on to the second spot with the way Dubuque's felt more consistent, and despite that large run from Team USA, I think they'll fall back into the number 3 spot. Now, I don't think they fall any further, because then you see Youngstown with 29 points in 4th, Green Bay in 5th with 28, Muskegon in 6th with 27, and Cedar Rapids in 7th with 25 points. Any one of those teams can miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
There's no consistency there. There's really nothing from those teams. Not one of them has shown one thing that they do superior to anyone else in the league, or even close to superior to anyone else, that would indicate that they're going to be a team that might not miss the playoffs in the East. I don't know who's going to be the 7th seed, but it could be anyone between Youngstown, Green Bay, Muskegon, and Cedar Rapids right now, and I don't think any of those challenge number 3 in the East.
I don't either. I think a lot of it's going to be finding a little bit of consistency, staying healthy, and taking care of things on the defensive end, and I think that pretty much explains or describes that group of 4 that are battling for those last 3 spots.
Mm-hmm.
But I do agree, the top 3 spots in the East, Chicago, USA, and Dubuque, I think they're gonna stay there. Just by the way they've played, the way they've handled good quality teams. Mm-hmm. I think they're certainly the class of the Eastern Conference, and for my money, I think it's going to end up being Chicago, Dubuque, USA in that order, and then after that, I think that's where the real intrigue enters in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, the Western Conference, the top 5 teams are over 500 in terms of winning percentage. Only the top 3 are over 500 in winning percentage in the Eastern Conference, but the top 3 in the Eastern Conference, 2 of them are over 70%, and one of them's at 68% in terms of winning percentage. So that shows you how top-heavy that East is. Youngstown then 4th, Green Bay 5, Muskegon 6, Cedar Rapids 7, and Madison 8. And in the Western Conference, Des Moines 6, Sioux City 7, Sioux Falls 8, but only 1 point separates Sioux City and Sioux Falls from 7th and 8th, and only 3 points separating Sioux City from Des Moines in 7th and 6th place, respectively. So that is going to be a race that comes down to the end of the season. It seems like the Eastern Conference really a battle for seeding between 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6, and maybe Madison 4, 5, and 1 in their last 10. They could push themselves back into the conversation, but still 9 points out of 7th place right now are the Capitals. We'll take our final break. When we come back, we talked about it a little on last week's show. New Year's resolutions are coming up, and, we're too vain to make any for ourselves, so we made them for other people. USHL teams, which 5 did we pick, and what New Year's resolutions did we give them? Find out on the other side of the break. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky and Jim Leitner wrapping up here this Monday evening on Super Hits 106. 2 big games coming up next weekend for the Fighting Saints. On the road on Friday in Chicago against the league's top team in the Chicago Steel, who have won 9 straight games. And then get your tickets, 563-583-6880 or DubuqueFightingSaints.com on Saturday. It's a family 4-pack night, and they will play the very same Chicago Steel. Should be a great night, and hoping for a great crowd to root on the Fighting Saints in what could be the toughest competition they've faced this season so far. But it's time for New Year's resolutions, and as always, we're going to grab a couple teams from the USHL and suggest what their resolutions should be for this upcoming 2020 portion of the season. We each have 5 teams and a brief resolution for each team. So, Jim, if you'd like to kick things off here in the new year.
I'm going to start with the Madison Capitals. They're the last place team overall in the USHL. And when I think of New Year's resolutions, I think of people who have to make drastic changes, or they're so far out of shape or out of where they want to be that they have to make these drastic changes. Madison, I think, is a better team than it's shown, and that's the last 10 games they've gone 5-4-1, which is better than Youngstown. Mm-hmm. It's better than Green Bay. Mm-hmm. It's better than Muskegon. And it's better than Cedar Rapids, the teams directly ahead of them. They're still 11 points out of the playoffs with 32 games left, but let's not. If you're Madison, don't think that you have to make drastic changes, or that it's impossible to make changes, little changes to your game. I think it's a good enough hockey team that if they stay the course and just take little steps at a time, I think they can show big improvements over this second half. And I think that's a team that's going to be a spoiler to a lot of teams in the USHL. They're going to have an impact on the playoff race if they don't feel like all hope is lost. And so I do think that's a team that can make a difference. Can they make the playoffs? I don't see them making the playoffs, but there's still a lot to play for. There's still a lot of guys who don't have college commitments, or guys who are going to college who want to prepare for that next level. There's still a lot that they can do. So going into the new year, don't think that it's hopeless. Keep fighting, keep battling, and I think good things will come of it.
I have a very similar resolution for another team, and that's Omaha, and the resolution is just to be fine with sticking with what you have. They made more moves than anyone in the first half, and they made the biggest trade of the first half with Muskegon. Since that trade, they're 7-2-2. They've hit their stride. Whatever pieces they let go and brought in, they clearly had the right idea, because they've been a much better team, a much improved team since that trade. So I think for Omaha, it's just being content with that being your big move, and it just happened earlier than most teams make their big move, and now staying the course and figuring out how you can tweak what you have on the ice to make yourself a playoff team. So that's my resolution for Omaha.
Anytime we have New Year's resolutions, it's always about health, improving your health. And that leads me to the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders. They've lost their number one defenseman, Will Francis. He's out for the year with a knee injury. They picked up Joe Molinar from Tri-City. He only played a couple games, suffered a shoulder injury, and he's done for the year. They gave up 3 draft picks for Molinar, and now he's done for the year. So for Cedar Rapids, they're 2-8 in their last 10. For them, they just need to stay healthy, find a way to avoid the injury bug that has seemed to plague them. Over the last several years, it just seems like Cedar Rapids has always had good teams, and the years when they struggle are years when they have injury problems. So if they can get good health, I think they're a team that can contend for that playoff spot and finish in that, that 4 through 6 spot in the East.
Yeah, New Year's resolution, people different ways, but it's self-betterment in some ways. For Youngstown, it's better on the defensive end. I mean, we just talked about our teams that could miss the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. Youngstown is one of them. 120 goals allowed is the second most in the USHL, and somehow they're still in 4th place in the East. If they continue on this pace, they're going to be 7th place, because they have a minus 29 goal differential, and somehow they're in 4th place. That's just not going to hold up. Eventually, the losses are going to catch up with the way that they've been playing. Youngstown's got to focus on defense, otherwise they're not making the playoffs, so that's my resolution for the Phantoms.
Okay. Next one, I'm going to go with the Green Bay Gamblers, and Green Bay is a team that for years was by far the toughest home team in the USHL. Never lost at the Rush Center. It was tough to go there. It was a house of horrors for a lot of road teams. This year they're only 4-8-2 at home. And that's the second fewest home wins in the USHL. Only Madison has fewer with 3. So yet they're still in the playoff hunt. If they can improve the way they play at home, they really have to improve the way they play at home, then they can make a run at the playoff spot. But it's crazy to think that they're 4-8-2 at home when for so long you'd never win there.
That's a good one. For me, another theme with these New Year's resolutions, you always, I know a lot of people always try to be more decisive. That seems to be a New Year's resolution. That's my resolution for Waterloo. Pick a guy in net by the middle of February. Logan Stein and Gabriel Carrier have almost identically split time in net, but when it comes to playoffs, it's so tough to go with that goalie split. It never really happens in general. And last year, they had this similar situation where they finally picked a guy in net, but it wasn't until the playoffs started and Waterloo lost in the playoffs, I think, earlier than a lot of people expected them to. So be proactive, jump ahead of the game. You're going to have to pick someone. Make that decision by the middle of February, so whoever your starter is for the playoffs knows it by mid-February, and that can also help you decide, well, if that guy gets the bulk of the load like he would in the playoffs and he doesn't perform, go to the next guy. It gives you a little bit more room for error. So pick Carrier or Stein by the middle of February and make that your guy in net for the rest of the year.
It's tough if you're a goaltender who splits all season long, then you get to the playoffs and you're playing back-to-back games.
Yep.
Or playing 3 and 4 or 3 and 5. That's a tough challenge. So that's a good resolution for the Blackhawks. My next one, I'm going to go with the Tri-City Storm. They've been playing very well of late, but one area where I think they could really take another step is on their power play. They lead the USHL right now with 167 power play opportunities, but they rank 10th in the league in conversion rate. So they're only at 16.8%. So if they can bring that up a couple of ticks, maybe get it closer to 20%, that's going to be the difference in, winning games. And it's going to be a great opportunity for them to move up in the standings if they can just click a little bit better on that power play.
Yeah. My next one is the Fighting Saints, and boy, I tried to be serious for so long in this segment, but my natural nature is going to fail me now with the Fighting Saints. My New Year's resolution for them is to expand to Olympic ice because they have 15 goals on that surface in 2 games this year in Waterloo. At least for this year, this team is built to play on that larger ice surface. I remember interviewing Oliver David before that game, and he said, years with this team, with the Fighting Saints, he's had teams that dread going to Waterloo because, it's a house of horrors. It's so tough to play there. He said there's so many guys on this team that love going to Waterloo because they love playing on that big ice surface. They know they're faster than Waterloo. They know they're faster than just about every team in this league. And so when you have the extra ice to prove that, they have 2 games in a row. So for the Fighting Saints, expand to Olympic ice, make this place a little bit bigger here, and see if you can get the results just for the end of the year.
It might be cheaper to change all the signage in here instead of having Mystique Community Ice Center. Just change the signs to say Young Arena, and maybe get into their mindset that they're playing in Young Arena.
Young Arena might get another tenant here.
Exactly.
Like Fighting Saints will travel an hour and a half for all their home games.
Young Arena East, we call it.
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be a good one. My last one, I'm going to go with the Sioux City Musketeers. The Musketeers are right now, they're 10, 13, and 6, and they're 3 points out of the playoffs. My resolution is just to be better after regulation. They've lost 5 games in overtime and 1 game in a shootout. That's 6 points that they've lost, and they're 3 points out of the playoff right now. If they can be a little bit better in overtime or the shootout, a little bit more skilled that way, then they're, instead of battling for that last playoff spot, they're more comfortably in. So I think if they can improve a little bit in extra time, I think they'll be in better shape as far as the playoffs go.
My final New Year's resolution is Chicago, and I know I feel this way. I know some other people feel this way, but my New Year's resolution for Chicago is to denounce New Year's resolutions because there's nothing they need to change. What the hell are you going to change with Chicago? There is nothing that they need to change right now. They've lost a couple games, but they've really done everything right. You're going to lose a couple games during the season. Right now, they are far and away the best team in the USHL. They have 47 points through their first 28 games. They're on a ridiculous pace. They're on a pace right now, and it's tough to keep a pace like this, but they're on a pace right now to get the most points in a regular season in USHL Tier 1 history, which would be incredible. That mark sits at 98, but they are on pace to beat that record right now. Do I think that will last? Probably not, but they score goals in boatloads. They're one of the top 5 teams defensively as well. They're number 1 on the power play. They're number 2 on the penalty kill. There's not an area in Chicago right now that hasn't been working. Somehow they're better than the best offensive team in the league last year, which they were outside of Team USA, but I don't count that because it's 2 separate teams. And their only deficiency last year really was they weren't good in goal.
Exactly.
Victor Osterman's really good in goal this year for them.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad about him, so denounce New Year's resolutions. Forget the new year. We're not changing anything. Stay the course if you're Chicago. They're fantastic.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think really last year goaltending was the thing that really kept them from being an ultra elite team,
and they still made the Clark Cup Finals. I think they're much better than they were last year, and I think as of right now, you have to have Chicago as the Clark Cup favorite, Anderson Cup favorite as well, and
it's going to be tough to knock them off, and a big challenge ahead for the Fighting Saints this weekend.
Two huge games. It's a great segue to end this show, because next up on Super Hits 106, the next time you hear from us, it will be on Friday and Saturday. Fighting Saints and the Chicago Steel, a home, the top team in the league against your Fighting Saints. Thanks for tuning in tonight to the Fighting Saints Report, and we'll talk to you on Friday and Saturday as Dubuque takes on Chicago.